That's a huge advantage because it allows you to do that actually in many countries at the same time. And then looking at the traction you're seeing, you can decide where you want to deploy further resources.
Welcome to the Multilingual Content Podcast, where experts discuss international content management, product localization, and global expansion. I'm Katerina from Undertow. We create and manage localization programs for B2B SaaS companies so they can grow globally. Today, our founder, Nicola Calabrese, will be talking with Vincent Jong, who has over 15 years of experience in B2B SaaS. He started out as a founder and CEO of FunnelFox, then moved into product leadership roles at ZoomInfo and Dealfront, where he was Chief Product Officer. With that background, Vincent recently wrote a book about product-led sales, a framework that combines automation and human interaction to drive revenue and scale. In this episode, they will talk about how product-led sales can help you test new markets without hiring full sales teams right away, how to think about localization as a growth driver, and what to watch out for when you are expanding internationally. So, if you are thinking about taking your product global, this conversation is full of practical tips and lessons learned. So, let's dive in.
Hi, Vincent, and welcome to the Multilingual Content Podcast. How are you today?
Hey, Nicola, I'm great. How are you doing?
Good. And today we're going to talk about product-led sales. But before we jump right into the topic, would you mind introduce yourself a little bit and tell us about your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in B2B SaaS for about 15 years. First part of that as a founder of a company called FunnelFox, which I ran for 8 years as a CEO. After that, I went into product leadership. So I spent some time at ZoomInfo running the enterprise products there. Then I moved to Dealfront, where I was a VP of product and then the CPO for the past 3 years, actually. And I just transitioned to something new. So I'm still helping Dealfront with some of the M&A work, but I'm also spending more time back to being a founder and building products myself again.
And before we start talking about this extensively, would you mind defining a little bit what is product-led sales and how it differentiated from other approaches?
Right. Yeah, so the context is, of course, I released a book about product-led sales last year, and that came from many experience I had on that front. You know, in essence, product-led sales, when I refer to it, is any combination of product-led growth with a sales team, right? So you're combining automation with humans, and that can be at the beginning. So you have a trial, people sign up, and then you qualify them and decide who you want to engage people on. That's the classic setup for that. But it can also be that you sell a contract first through your sales team, and later you use the product to guide people towards upselling or additional modules and so on. So those are kind of the two ways, or like two general ways product sales could be viewed. And yeah, I've done a lot of work with that already. When we were running FunnelFox, we had a product-led sales motion. And then at Dealfront, which is the result of a merger of two companies, Leadfeeder and EchoBot. And Leadfeeder has been doing product-led sales for over 12 years by now. A lot of data, a lot of experience, and we've been working on throughout the merger to bring those principles also to the other products we have. So it was a very interesting way of looking at that, having like one company based on the traditional sales method, one doing product-led sales, and then putting them together and trying to get the benefits of both worlds everywhere.
And do you see that how these apply maybe when you're entering new markets? How have you found like product-led sales to be an effective approach for entering a new international market?
So one of the things that can be challenging when you're entering new markets is to hire teams there, right? And if you're doing sales the traditional way, that means when you enter a new market, your first step is to hire people. Now, you can be smart about it and first hire someone where you already have an office that speaks the language, but that's about as efficient as now if you're doing product-led sales. So if you have, for example, a free trial that people can get started with, you can start testing interest in certain markets without having anybody there, right? You can just see if your offering is of interest there. If people engage with it, you can try it first in English. And if you want to try, if in some countries, the local language is just more important. If I want to launch in France or I want to launch in certain countries where, like the English is just less common for people to use in their tooling, then I might translate it already. And still, without having to hire people, I can go to market there. So That's a huge advantage because it allows you to do that actually in many countries at the same time. And then looking at the traction you're seeing, you can decide where you want to deploy further resources.
And do you see this particularly effective with some segments of the customer or some specific verticals, or you think it might be used for different kind of SaaS companies?
So the only place where it might work less well at the moment still is if you're talking large enterprise deals, because there are people, like if someone's spending six figures, like 100,000 or more, you could maybe even say still 50,000 or more at this point. They are expecting to talk with someone. They're expecting to buy in a certain way that is not just product led, right? That's just a reality. And so if that's your business, then it makes sense to still go the traditional way. But it's also easier to justify because if you hire someone and they sell one deal, then you can probably cover the salary already, definitely at two deals, right? So it's a lot easier in that case to justify that salary, but it also takes long before you can validate that because those sales cycles are typically longer. So that's like the segment that is probably less applicable. In terms of going international, I still think there is a room for product-led sales there, but it's more like someone has bought something already. How do they start using more? How do they onboard more users? How do they start using additional modules? But like, let's save that for another moment. But in terms of internationalization, that's the only category I would say is truly out of reach. Then there are sometimes challenges if your product or your offering is heavily influenced by regulation. That might mean that you do have to change what you offer. You cannot just offer what you had in one country and go to the next one and offer it there. That simple example, accounting software. You cannot just take your German accounting software and offer it in the Netherlands. It won't work. Different rules, right? So that's something, of course, to take into account. But in terms of the actual go-to-market motion, like how people buy, like if you're doing it through a free trial, for example, then I think there's not much stopping you except for the deal size.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're getting the best of both worlds when you're using the product-led part and then, let's say, sales connected with them. That's absolutely. And apart from the cultural regulatory environments, do you see any other challenges maybe when implementing in new markets?
Yeah, so maybe just to respond to one thing you said there, like the thing with product-led sales is you're using humans to improve the conversion of your product-led process. That's actually how to think about it, right? So you have a process that people can go through by themselves. And if they want to, they can talk with nobody and just go through the whole thing. That's the ideal product-led sales setup. But there's certain segments where you say, hey, if I call these people, I know they convert better. And so I can take an example from what we do at Dealfront, for example. We have anyone in the world can sign up for our lead feeder product to figure out who's visiting their website. But there's only certain countries where we will pick up the phone and call certain companies even that sign up. And we help them get set up because we know if we do that there's a higher chance of them getting value and therefore hopefully becoming a customer of ours. We don't do that for countries in Latin America because we don't have a sales team there. Our focus has just historically been more on Europe and the US. And that doesn't mean we never will, but that means people there can buy by themselves. So we will see lower conversion rates there, but they can still do it, right? Now, to your question, you then asked like, hey, are there any other challenges then if you do this? The challenge of going international with these things is that you do have to kind of get traffic, right? Like when you're trying to do sales internationally, you identify the target accounts you want to go after, you start emailing, calling, or sending LinkedIn messages, and you'll get some response. Now, if it's product-led, you got to somehow get that interest. And there's a lot of conversion steps along the way before someone ever comes to your website and maybe consider signing up, right? In some cases, that's relatively easy. You just localize your ad campaign or something like that. And if PPC is a channel that works for you, then that could be a way of doing that. But in other cases, it might be harder. You can't always influence who is coming to your website. If you're doing SEO, like that doesn't allow you really to target where people are coming from necessarily, apart from picking languages, of course. So that you need a certain volume. You need to have exposure to know if it converts or not. And I think that then becomes the main challenge. And so you still need to choose which markets you want to learn from. And you still need to do some effort there to get people to actually find you and then see if they like you.
Yeah, I mean, it does make sense to focus on some specific markets rather than all out. And I do agree, like making sure that you can attract the people before you can convert them, because otherwise you have no traffic. So that's like what we usually recommend: analyzing the whole customer journey, see what channels work for you. You can test. Not necessarily the same channel are going to be effective in all the markets, but you can start testing out the ones that you do know that work in your country. So as you say, like maybe a PPC campaign, you start from the most successful one, and then you see you don't need to do all of that, and then gradually build up the experience for local users. And related to this, like how important do you think it's important to localize the product experience, and what aspects do you think should be prioritized during the international expansion?
So this is always an interesting discussion because, of course, especially at Dealfront, right, as a European player, like, yes, we're also in the US, but of course, our roots are in Europe with companies that were founded in Germany and in Finland. And we have strong presence in the Nordics and DACH regions. So language is obviously something we're very familiar with, and it's often a consideration. But it's always it's hard to quantify the value of it. Like, what will be the uplift? Like, we're already live in the Nordics everywhere, in Sweden, Finland, or Denmark. What will be the uptick if we go from English to offering it in Danish, Swedish, Norwegian? Like, will we actually convert more? Yes or no? And we have been going back and forth on that. And I think I do believe that there is big potential in that, but it's something that you need to kind of get management buy-in for that as well, because it does change your processes in a way, right? Like, from there on, everything you do, you need that additional translation. So you need to have a good process in place that doesn't slow you down. And I have been in companies in the past where adding every language, we added a significant amount of work. And I think that's not necessary anymore today with the technology that exists. Like, it doesn't have to, like, it's like having 2 languages or 6 shouldn't be that much work, that additional work anymore, as I see it. You'll know better, I guess, than me. But that's always been the consideration, because then aligning that with the marketing website, because we have the product, of course, and the marketing website, and then you have the blog. So those are like the 3 areas where we considered this. We ended up just having our core languages there, so the core markets we served. But it was like this returning discussion every time. Like, do we do it now? Do we still wait? It can be hard with competing priorities to get it. I've always been an advocate of doing this, but it's hard to define exactly, okay, this is how much work it is, and this is what we expect the outcome to be. But that's with many initiatives, that's the case. And so that's not unusual necessarily, but that's kind of where
And do you think, like, for example, testing out some specific campaigns with the product-led side of things and see if, like, there is an actual uptick, and then use those data to, say, justify a bigger investment in the market? Would it make sense, stuff like that?
Yeah. So if you think about what we're doing in sales, right? Like, we do reach out to people in the local language, right? So obviously, because we have local sales teams, so you're not going to write someone in English if you have a local person there who speaks the language, right? That we know is very important to do that, right? So therefore, it's obvious in my view that if the customer journey moves to the product instead of being a sales conversation, that you would also see better results there if you would localize. So for the products that I'm building right now as well, language is actually a part there that we try to integrate from day one, the multi-language kind of a setup, so that we don't have to have a big project later on when we realize that we know.
Yeah, but one of the issues that I see often is that when you're going from English to other languages, if you, for example, haven't prepared the code to be localizable, that's going to be a whole new project that you have to put on the schedule to, like, extract the strings and prepare everything for that. But the other thing, going back to what you mentioned, like adding new languages, it doesn't necessarily need to be like a lot of extra work. But yeah, it's true. Like, if you set up the processes, you can make them scalable in the sense that obviously it's going to be something extra, but not like the same amount that you had the first time that you added one language.
No.
So then the balance is finding, like, how many languages can you add? Because if you have too many, it might become difficult to manage and to focus especially. But I think too few, maybe you don't get enough, like, let's say, scalability advantages. So finding a balance, and then that changes for every company.
That's why I said, like, the difference between 2 and 6 is not that big. The difference between 1 and 2 is big, but the difference between 2 and 6 should not be, right? Like, or 10. Like,
yeah, because especially if you start out and doing a lot of manual processes, when you want to scale up, you do want to have, like, automated processes in place.
Oh yeah.
And maybe when it's just one market, you don't think it's worth it, but when it starts becoming like 6, 10, it's definitely, like, it's unnecessary. It's no longer optional.
Just think about it, right? If you could increase your conversion to sales by 10% in every market, in any market, would you do it? And I don't know, 10%, that just, pulled that out of thin air. I do think it's like in that range, maybe even more, like if you do this well. So if you could do that, would be worth it. Hell yeah. Right. Like that's,
Yeah, you get like bigger brands that they get, SaaS brands that they get to like half of their revenue is coming from markets that don't speak English. So, and then if you go in, dig down deeper, like if they're a US company, you see there's much more than that because there's still like countries that speak English but not US.
Yeah. And you see the same in self-serve conversion, right? There's plenty of research on that. If you offer people their home currency, they're more likely to convert than if you offer them only US dollar, for example. And it's the same thing in the end. It's the same, in my understanding, it would be the same process in your brain happening. It's just like, okay, this is less familiar to me than what I know, so I don't like it, right? And if, currency, of course, when it's about money, people are more sensitive there even, but language is the same thing in the end, right? And all these things add up. So the same way that they say people need to see your brand like 7 times, or I don't know if it's 14 times nowadays or whatever, before they trust you. I think in the same way, like distrust or confusion also comes in multiple touch points, right? There's a few little things on top of each other. Like they're not going to leave your website because it's in English, but maybe it's your website's in English, your currency is in US dollar, and then 1 or 2 other things happen. And they're like, yeah, I don't know. This is probably not for me, right?
But the date, imagine if it's like a scheduling app and the dates are in the US format. That's really confusing for Europeans.
Like, okay, this is not made for me, right? Like, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And same way the other way around, of course. Yeah.
And everything in the language shows that you care about the market.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And so it's these little things that compound that I think they really do drive real results, right?
Sorry to interrupt your listening, but do you want to grow your B2B SaaS in international markets? Because every country is different, and what users value in one market doesn't necessarily matter in another one. At Undertow, we help B2B SaaS companies like yours succeed in their international expansion. We create customized localization strategies that address the unique challenges of each market. In this way, you can effectively attract, engage, and convert customers worldwide. Visit undertowlanguages.com to find out more. And now back to the show. Yeah, I mean, I always recommend starting small, but then setting up already that you can scale when you see the success in different markets. Yeah, if you try to do everything all at once, it works like it's too much. It's overwhelming. And when it comes to like user feedback and iterations, like how do you incorporate user feedback from different regions in your product development process, especially when you're going into different markets that might have different pain points or requirements?
So again, looking at the most recent experience, I think it depends what the feedback is on, right? So in Dealfront, like the products that we sell in like at a high level, they're all the same. But once you look a bit deeper, the sources for data in Germany are different than the sources for data in Finland or in the Netherlands or in UK or US, right? And that's logical because each country has different trade registers. Each country has different places it's a very localized kind of approach in terms of collecting the data. And so there is feedback there, product feedback that comes back like, oh, this doesn't work the way someone expected or this, and you have to look at that per region in that case. So it's not necessarily regulation based, but it is like specific. Our offering is different per region there because that's how we try to get to the highest coverage and the highest quality. Now, if you look at general product feedback, like the onboarding process or things like that, I treat everyone the same, unless it's clear that a certain country has problems with something, right? It's like, I don't know, maybe they don't want to submit a picture in some country. I don't know, right? Like something very specific, which hasn't happened. I'm just trying to think through if there would be a scenario. That's the only case where I would look at it, but we're not by default segmenting the feedback by region. We're not, no.
Yeah, I guess because otherwise it becomes difficult as well to like start getting like several different products in different countries.
Yeah, and the way that we would capture these kind of things, if they're regional, is through our customer success team. So the customer success team would be talking with people and they will actually realize, hey guys, this doesn't make sense in this market. We need to change that somehow. And that has happened. So again, example from Germany is like, we need to show if it's male or female, the person that people reach out to, because of grammar. Because if you don't know how to open your message, right? Like, because there's like the grammar rules require you to write it in one way or the other based on which it is, right? And so that's a requirement, product requirement there. Not required anywhere else, but there it is, right? And so that's language dependent, actually, and something we have there for a long time already, and something that many other players don't, and therefore they simply cannot do business there well. So those things do happen. Yeah.
And when it comes like measuring success, like what kind of metrics would you look at when entering international markets to see like if the international expansion is being a success or maybe is not working out as expected?
Well, that's basics, I guess, right? I don't think I'm going to tell you anything new on that one, but yeah, we would just look at adoption. So engagement, conversion, adoption, but we would compare it with markets that we know, right? So we would look at, hey, this is what we're seeing in this market, and we're doing a similar thing there. Are people using it the same way? Yes or no? Right? And so we do look at, I mean, the product usage is in the end the true predictor of value. It will tell us if people will retain or not, and that, those are good customers. So if we see good product usage, then we're good, right? And then volume is a second consideration after that. But we first want to make sure that we get the right customers in and that they're getting to value, because else we have the infamous leaky bucket, and that's not something that we can grow on.
And do you do like some kind of adjustment when comparing, say, for example, with your home market where you've been for a while, you're well established, and the new market where you're new? What kind of adjustment would you recommend doing there?
Yes, definitely. Expect lower conversion, of course, right? So if you're thinking about the beginning of the funnel where it's like creating awareness, getting people to your website, getting them to convert, all of that, expect lower conversion by definition, especially in the beginning. Closing rates from the sales team, same thing, right? We don't have the same social proof. We don't have our talk track optimized yet entirely for that market. We can't just easily say we work with these and these guys as well, and you'll know them. So a lot of reasons why you would not yet be, and often people are new for that market, so they also need to still be onboarded. So many reasons why it wouldn't perform at the same level as your optimized markets that will be higher. But what you want to see is a foundation that you can build on, right? So, but then when people get into the product, they should be getting value, right? So there, I don't expect too much of a difference, actually. I would expect very similar behavior. It's just like getting people to the point that they're willing to try it out. That's where you'll see very different numbers, yeah.
Yeah, like let's say gaining against the skepticism at the beginning because they don't know you.
Yeah.
And then once they're in, yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, they're still in the same product. So they should get similar results. So
that's right.
And going back to the product-led sales framework, like how do you see the role of sales teams evolving when expanding in new countries, especially following this framework?
So the thing, if you're doing product-led sales, the role of the sales team is often more to help people use the product and to get to value, to implement best practices, to maybe help them onboard the rest of their team, to help them have internal conversations with other stakeholders that may need to give approval, and even to handle payments. So you're helping increase conversion of a process that exists in your product. And that's both in the markets where you are as well as in the ones that you would be entering. So, how that would change, like you'd still first see if the automated process is starting to pull the right people in. And once you see that, you say, okay, now let's start trying to increase that number with the salespeople in a similar way. And you can actually start by using your support team for that. Like you can just say, hey, if we start calling people and we help them get set up with a person, do we see an uptick in conversion rate? And if we see yes, which you kind of know already, but before you hire a full-blown sales team, you may take this lighter step. And then if that works, then, you have justified one step further that you can now hire a team there. So the work itself doesn't really change necessarily, but you can take this gradual approach. And the other thing that you can do is what I said initially, like instead of right away hiring a team in another country, maybe take one person in where you are based already, take a person that speaks the language and get them to generate enough revenue so the country pays for itself, right? So that the moment that you then hire someone there, like, okay, we're already this is already a good business case in the end. And from there, it's easier to grow. And what some companies do is they just enter a bunch of countries at once and they don't really have it proven yet. And it takes time sometimes. It's not an overnight success in most cases. So then they burn through a lot of money and only to realize like, okay, like this, there was a more foundational level that we needed to get right. And, taking this approach I just said helps you to protect yourself a bit from that and just go where there's traction in the end and invest there.
Yeah, it makes absolutely sense. And I was thinking, yeah, because one of the things that I was going to ask you, but you already replied to that, was how different it is then from a customer success role, maybe. Is it kind of a more hybrid? So as you recommended, I think, yeah, it's a good idea to start maybe if you already have that with the support. And then once it's justified hiring, maybe sales team. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I like that. That is gradual.
The main difference with customer success in the end is that customer success gets engaged once someone is a customer, once they're paying, basically, and that the product-led sales team is engaged before. Now, of course, don't get me wrong, the sales team does also have other goals that it can have. For example, maybe they're trying to get more people on an annual contract versus a monthly, which the customer can pick both, but still in a sales conversation, you can steer towards a certain direction and increase the conversion of that. So there's more around that. And on the CS side, what you're seeing today is that there is more focus on upsell as well, instead of having a separate account management team for that. So that's a little bit how the two are different. And maybe one more thing worth mentioning actually is that product-led sales team, it's all about velocity, right? So you try to close a deal as fast as possible, and you don't really go for maximizing the deal. You leave that to the CS team or account management team afterwards. You just want to get people onboarded, close the deal, become a paying customer, get value, right? And then from there on, you'll have further processes to grow. So through land and expand motion is typically what's called.
Is there anything else that we didn't discuss that you would like, before we wrap up, you would like to mention, or any recommendation?
Well, in the end, this is all about speed, learning fast enough, right? It's always about, are you learning fast enough? So going in with smaller deal sizes allows you to learn faster because sales cycles are shorter, right? Going in with this automated approach, again, like it allows you to much faster try different countries. I try in these kind of things to optimize for speed of learning. And there's many ways you can do that. It sometimes also just means hire a sales rep and get them to make some calls, right? I'm not against that at all, but try to have that in mind instead of just blindly saying everyone's going to the US, we should do it too, because then you could end up burning a lot of money, and that's money that's not really available anymore in today's environment, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes it's underestimated how complicated it is to go to the US, rather than maybe, especially for European SaaS, maybe it's easier to move it in place you already know. Yeah. And what's the best way for people to reach out or learn more about what you do? Is there a specific channel that you would recommend to reach out?
Yeah, it's simple. I'm on LinkedIn. Look me up on LinkedIn. I always engage, or I always respond. Happy to connect with anyone there.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. It was such a good conversation.
Great. Thanks, Nikolai. Great to be here.
Thanks for joining us today. The Multilingual Content Podcast is powered by Undertow. We help B2B SaaS companies grow in any language. Get in touch if you want to know more. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episode. If you want to support us, remember to give 5 stars to the podcast. See you next time.